present it the way I put it down as I was thinking. Of course, the topic is weather forecasting for Africa, challenges and opportunities. In the discussion, I will attempt to briefly review the socio-economic impacts of extreme weather in Africa, and of course relate these to the development of weather forecasting that provides information to show that yes, these are challenges, the weather situation, the extreme weather are challenges, but there are also opportunities. Opportunities for researchers, opportunities for the academic people, and also opportunities for people in business. This is the focus of my presentation today. Weather forecasting has evolved, as you know, over centuries from simple art of observing recurring meteorological phenomena and seasonal movements of celestial bodies to the present-day scientific methods that combine use of instruments, computer models, as well as knowledge of trends and patterns derived from recorded data. Of course, before the development of these modern methods, various African societies, and indeed other societies in other parts of the world, had their traditional ways of forecasting weather and, of course, of coping with the challenges of extreme weather events that are peculiar to their own environment and localities. These include observation of weather characteristics, direction of winds, migration of birds and insects, and relating these to the occurrence of rain. Well, in my own native locality, they're able to tell whether there's going to be bumper harvest, whether there's a lot of fruits next season, by knowing the kind of conditions that prevailed during the harmattan that precedes the rainy season. And so some of these traditional methods are still in use. And indeed, some forecasters, some authors have advocated that it should be possible to integrate some of these local knowledge with modern scientific methods to help have better forecasts that are usable by the people, the local societies out there. Of course, this blend is already in use in some African countries, particularly by farmers. Now, the improved understanding through research of the science underpinning atmospheric processes, coupled with the use of modern instruments and computer models, have enabled more accurate weather forecasting with good lead time. Most of the computer models are run by advanced weather centers like the ECMWF, and the model outputs are disseminated to communities around the world. Of course, net services in Africa that have access to these models have found them very useful. Nigeria is one of them. I just had a meeting with the Director General, and that was the question he was asking me. We do find these products very useful, and particularly for giving weather information, making forecasts for agriculture, energy sector, and so on and so forth. Now, we know that in 2009, the process of developing the WMO GFCS started. And of course, this GFCS has been domesticated in a couple of African countries, including Nigeria, Senegal, and Mali. And the emphasis now is to provide quality services, weather and climate services, to address the escalating challenges of climate change and variability. Now, what are the consequences? What impacts have these extreme weather conditions had on African countries? Of course, the African continent is a continent where many of the countries are already threatened by other extreme environmental hazards, food insecurity, water stress, health challenges. Of course, some of these challenges are weather-related in one way or the other. At the same time, it is the continent that is most vulnerable to extreme weather phenomena. A report published by the African Development Bank in 2011 showed that, measured as a percentage of GDP, climate damages in Africa are expected to be higher than in any other continent, any other region of the world. It further estimated that the cost of adaptation is in the range of 20 to 30 billion US dollars. Now, in the report on the UN report on the MDG published in 2013, it noted that the livelihoods of countless African households will be imperiled without efforts to improve resilience to environmental hazards, including, of course, those that are attributable to climate change. For the African continent, we know that crop production, pasture land for livestock production, are predominantly rain-fed. What does that mean? It means that the socioeconomic consequences of drought, the two extremes, drought and flooding, will indeed be significant. Of course, bearing in mind that agriculture contributes, in some cases, up to 32% of GDP of some African countries and employs 65% of the labor force in the continent. And the dependence on agriculture makes the economic and infrastructural development of most African countries particularly vulnerable to extreme weather due to climate change. Eradication of extreme poverty and hunger is listed as the first in the UN Millennium Development Goals. And one of the specific targets is to reduce by half, between 1990 and 2015, the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. In its recent review, the Food and Agricultural Organization noted that the progress in achieving the international food targets in Africa has been slow, and that sub-Saharan Africa especially is lagging behind the global trends. Extreme weather, therefore, are among the dominant factors contributing to this unfortunate situation. Now, in 2013, we have already noted that the African Development Bank also agrees that the provision and use of appropriate climate-related information in development planning is fundamental to addressing Africa's climate change risks. We know that many countries are investing a sizable proportion of their annual budgets to development of infrastructure. But unfortunately, the effort over a long time will be wiped out even by hours of extreme weather events like flooding. There was flooding in Nigeria in 2012, and after that, the World Bank and other agencies did a review, the post-disaster need assessment, and they established that the entire damage was as much as $398 US. Now, these frequent occurrences of extreme weather are challenging hazards, but it also provides opportunities for insurance business, especially weather index insurance. Of course, we know that managing risk is the core business of insurance companies. It is also a commercial opportunity for weather forecasting service, because for you to have weather index insurance, you must have good weather forecasts. In Africa, some insurance companies are already taking advantage of this. Now, with the shift in patterns due to weather climate change, the traditional ways which we mentioned earlier are no longer reliable to forecast weather or to cope with the challenges of extreme weather. Fortunately, we now have the scientific methods that have been developed. However, the dearth of physical infrastructure and the inadequate skilled manpower, coupled with poor funding, make it difficult for weather services in Nigeria to cope with increasing demand for weather forecasts my mind goes back to the slide which Bruce put up, where he says that Africa, it was patchy. And that's the reason. Of course, there have been efforts ongoing through some programs and institutions to strengthen both infrastructure and human capacity needs of these MET services. For instance, the WMO through the VCP, the Voluntary Cooperation Program, has provided tremendous support. And the VCP has contributed significantly to improving on the situation. Bruce also mentioned the AMA project. There are others like the Climate Development for Africa by the African Development Bank and the African Union Commission. Of course, there is the PUMA project, which I'm sure some of us here are familiar with. These initiatives, coupled with efforts of governments in Africa, have resulted in significant development of some capacities. Although the challenges and gaps still exist, there is evidence of significant progress. Now, an example of this is that ICAO presently insisted that some African countries must be ISO 9001 certified for their aeronautical products. And it is heartwarming to note that in the past 3 years, 12 African countries have been able to make the ICAO ISO 9001 certification. Nigeria is, of course, one of them. Thanks to all those programs, the AMA project, the TOPEX, and so on and so forth, they help to build capacity that has enabled these MET services to meet that target. Of course, development partners and other international organizations can leverage on what has already been achieved and build mutually beneficial partnership. And at this point, I have to mention that the UK Met Office and the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, NIMET, saw this vision a few years back, probably since 2009, and we commenced a process of working out a technical services arrangement, which we are at the last stage of concluding, probably tomorrow or next. This will create a platform for us to explore the huge opportunities, not only in Nigeria, but also around the Gulf of Guinea. Well, despite the present challenges, the African continent holds tremendous economic prospects and provide opportunities for scientific research, commercial and investment, as well as investment interests. The economies of a number of countries in the continent are rated as the fastest growing globally. For instance, there is the Citibank rating that has identified 11 countries in the world that will be global growth generators, economic growth generators. And these are countries that they say will drive global economies up to 2050. 2 African countries are in the list. Nigeria is one. The other one is Egypt, the 3G countries. There is also the mint countries, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. So everywhere, economists are telling us that Africa is it. There are potentials. But these are potentials that we need to take advantage of. If there are such huge growths, it means there will also be increase in activities, construction, transportation, agriculture that will require the services of forecasters. So this is where the opportunity lies for all of us, for weather forecasters, for meteorologists, because as these economic potentials are being explored, climate and weather-related services will collaterally increase. And these are opportunities for all of us. Of course, we need to have collaborations. The type we are building, we have built with the UK Met Office to enable us tap into these opportunities. It is evident that extreme weather, indeed, especially drought and flooding, have been recurrent in parts of Africa, and we need timely and accurate weather forecasts to manage those risks. However, the forecasting in Africa is hindered by these deficits. Again, cast your mind back to Bruce's slide. And these challenges could be seen as opportunities. Finally, let me end by reminding us that the terminal date of the MDG is 2015. What happens in the post-2015 years? My idea and my own thinking, and I believe many people, especially those in development economics, would agree that development programs in Africa will be more emphatic on climate resilience. There will be more need for weather index insurance. It is important to note that weather forecasting for Africa will remain pivotal to achieving the goal of ensuring sustainability of what has already been gained in the Millennium Development Goals. And it is important to further strengthen the existing relationships between MET services in Africa and advanced weather centers. There is also need to support MET services to generate and transmit observational data. Again, Bruce's slide keeps popping up. We must populate those gaps. And we can do that through further collaboration, further support from the more advanced centers. Once again, I thank you very much for this invitation and for this great opportunity. Thank you.